We selected 3 editions of Dante's work in English. They were translated by the Reverend Henry Francis Clay. 2 were illustrated by Gustave Doré, Dante's Inferno and the Divine Comedy of Dante Alighieri. Division or Hell, Purgatory and Paradise of Dante Alighieri features illustrations by John Flaxman. Among the other works are Blake's illustrations of the Divine Comedy, by Albert Rowe, and a 1921 facsimile or reproduction of the Codice Trivulziano 1080. This last book, the Codice, was the only book among those that we reviewed that features illustrations in color. These illustrations, they're stunning, they're creative, the design of them and the art. The use of color, they are enhanced by these stories that are told in the cantos. All but one of the books that we analyzed devoted a full page illustration to each of the 3 scenes, because the 1520 edition that we analyzed, it included 3 scenes into one illustration. So there were different things happening at the same time. For example, Dante in the woods represents Dante as he was lost and confused while he was trying to understand his bearings. This was in Canto 1, but the lines 1 and 2. Also, we can see Dante encountering the 3 wild animals at the same time. This evokes a sense of fear and flight, and Dante illustrated as he moved to the other way from the beasts. This was Canto, but this was line 31 to 53. And lastly, we have Dante walking off with Virgil as his guide. He gave a sense of confidence and trust, and he felt like he was going to find his way, and this was lines 130 to 36.
We worked on the Dante's Inferno translated by the Reverend Henry Francis Carey, which was illustrated by Gustave Doré. In this, our assignment was to choose 2 to 3 of Doré's pieces from the book and explore how his representations reflect the lines that they are related to in Dante's Inferno. So through this, we discovered that Doré's works are highly emotional. He uses deep contrasts of light and dark, highly detailed backgrounds, and creates the faces of his subjects to reflect the emotion of the scene. So the 3 that we chose were Doré's illustration of Dante in the Dark Wood in Canto 1, Ugolino gnawing on the brains of Archbishop Ruggieri in Canto 32, and also Doré's illustration of Beatrice directing Virgil to guide Dante through hell in Canto 2.
All right, our group is going to be presenting and comparing and contrasting several different artists and their images. This particular one is the Circle of the Lustful with Francesca Davini and Paolo Malatesta, which is a depiction from Canto 5. This depiction shows Dante calling over the 2 lovers, Francesca and Paolo, whose souls are condemned to hell after committing lustful sin in their human lives. The souls are described as being blown about by terrible hurricane-type winds. In this picture, the souls are trapped in these swirls of wind, forced to obey its whims wherever they may lead. This is a very famous depiction, and the 2 lovers themselves have a very famous story outside of Dante's Inferno. And this mixture of expressive black lines kind of bring the eye sweeping across the page, similar to how the souls are being eternally whipped around by the winds. The exaggerated curvature of the figures seem to pull and stretch, bend and contort these forms. And we'll see this type of artistry again in a different illustration by Rico Libra here in a minute. Despite all of these expressive lines, there are still some very thin and determinate lines, similar to other images that we, as a group, have examined, some by Peter Breiger and Millard Meist and Charles Singleton. And even though this is a very striking movement and an electric type of image, we still see Dante being very pitiful of the 2 lovers.
We also analyzed this illustration by Botticelli. It's an engraving from 1481, and it shows 3 kind of simultaneous events that are depicted in Cantos 1 through 3. So in this first, it's moving from left to right. Yeah. And in this first scene, it depicts scenes from Canto 1. And so this is Dante and Virgil meeting for the first time. Virgil acts as Dante's guide throughout the Inferno and Purgatorio. Virgil, as you can see, is standing a little bit taller than Dante, which kind of signifies the authority he has over Dante as like his mentor and his leader through hell and beyond. This middle scene, we can also see Virgil and Dante here. It depicts Canto 2, in which Dante's feeling very depressed and kind of full of despair. So Virgil encourages him by telling him about Beatrice and how Beatrice, who is depicted right here, suspended in the sky, she sent Virgil to guide Dante through hell and to encourage Dante. Beatrice is kind of a very central figure in Dante's comedy, and Dante's in love with her. She kind of depicts like the holy and the divine. And then the third scene is kind of like this last half of the illustration, and so it shows the gates of hell. You probably can't see it from the camera, but written over the gates of hell, it says Per me, which is the first line of the inscription above the gates of hell in Dante's Inferno.
So we are going to talk about Canto 3. We analyzed two different translations. One was like really poetic, the other one was written in prose. So we were able to see like several differences there. One was written in 1935, the other one was written in 1904. The one in 1935 was written by Carey, and then the other one was written by Tozer. Something really interesting that we found out, like for example, for the one written in the poetic version, for example, was that we saw many more details. Like we were able to kind of even feel like what it meant to transition into hell, because Canto 3 was a really important canto because it was the very first impression of Dante in hell. So it was something called Ante Inferno. So basically there was one really important character, which was Charon, who was the traghettatore, which is essentially the ferryman, the person who is like in the middle, making like people go to hell, basically transporting them. Initially, this man did not want to transport Dante, but then like Virgil convinced him to do that. We were able to see that there were like some, I was able to see that there were certain details missing in both versions actually when it comes to details, although I said that the one written in the poetic version had many more details when it comes to what he felt at first, like how much like he cried when he saw all those fickle souls like wandering basically. But even if so, I didn't see the wasps details or the maggots, which were like some sort of punishment for all those naked people who were walking around, who did not belong to hell or to heaven or to Paradiso, basically. And this leads me to my other point, that in Dante's mind, it was really important to make decisions in life to be consistent with something. It was like even better to make mistakes, but to try, basically. All these souls who were totally naked, they were not suffering just because they couldn't make it to like heaven, but they were suffering because they couldn't fit in hell either. Ava is going to like give some further details about like both versions specifically, but yeah, that was like some sort of general introduction of what's coming.
So as Pablo was mentioning, we compared two different translations.
And as you can see, this one by Carey is written more in a poetic format, which is more like the original Italian. And this one by Tozer is more written as a novel. And we thought that this one, written in prose, was more concerned with descriptions, and like I said, was written more in a novel format. And this one was more about like strong language, and it was written as a poem. And when we compared both of these translations to the original Italian, we deemed that both of the translations were super accurate, but each translation is unique in what they offer the audience. If you're looking for something that has a little bit more strong language and more descriptions, the one by Carey might be one you want to look at, but if you're looking for something that reads more like a story, the one like Tozer might be more interesting to look at. And the one with Carey also includes illustrations by Doré, which is also really interesting, but both translations are accurate to the original Italian.
For our assignment, we were tasked with describing the illuminations at the beginning of the Inferno, and as well as translating and transcribing the introductory paragraphs on Inferno, Purgatorio, and Paradiso. The text that we specifically looked at is a 1921 facsimile of Codice Trevelziano 1080, aka Dante di Cento. It is the earliest surviving Florentine manuscript. It was copied 13 years after Dante's death in 1334. However, this original copy was produced in 1921. So, about the images on Inferno, they provide an introductory and a summary of the first canto, canto 1 of Inferno. So starting from right to left, Dante is first awakened in the forest by Virgil, and then Dante is confronted by the leopard, the lion, and the she-wolf. And then Dante and Virgil begin their descent into hell. And the cool thing about the images is if you follow them, they lead you right up into the very first words in the text, so you can begin reading your story right after you've watched a visual interpretation of this canto.
And as for the introductory paragraphs, which we were tasked with transcribing and translating, they're each kind of a short summary of what the reader is expected to, experience in the cantica that they're about to read. So they all have the common feature of describing the area of the afterlife which Dante is getting led through, but they also each include a little additional detail. So in the case, for example, of Inferno, it mentions that in the second sentence, begins the first canto of the first part, which functions as a proem to the entire work. So it kind of gives you that heads up that the beginning is a proem. In the intro paragraph for Purgatorio, it mentions that it contains 33 cantos, which I don't know why, but it's the only one that has that in its introductory paragraph, even though all the canticas have 33. And then in the beginning paragraph for Paradiso, it includes a much longer additional detail, which we found was very interesting, where it mentions, one, that it's divided into 9 parts, and also that the first canto functions as a preface for the canticle, and it is in the element of fire, and Beatrice solves an issue for the author. In this canto, the author promises to discuss the divine things evoking the poetic science, which is Apollos or Apollo, also known as the god of wisdom.